All right. Good evening, everybody. My name's Adam White, and I'm trying to get things set up and rolling here, but looks like we've got folks connecting on Instagram and Facebook. So let me go ahead and just while we're letting folks kind of tune in here, if you've been watching these for any length of time, you know that we've had some technical difficulties off and on. And a lot of those difficulties have been dealing with bandwidth issues and trying to feed a live video stream to multiple platforms at the same time. And I've got Starlink here at the hangar here at the Nenana headquarters for the Government Legislative Affairs for the Airmen's Association, and it's pretty good, but I cannot stream consistently two live video feeds without some problems. I especially cannot do that if I am someplace other than right here. So been doing a little bit of market research, and so we are going to make a shift next month, and it will be we'll be doing this on YouTube primarily, and then we will be linking to that video on Facebook and Instagram instead of that's 180 degrees from what we've been doing. What we've done in the past is done it live here and then post it to YouTube later. Been reaching out to the membership, and the vast majority of the folks who have responded to my inquiries about that have been that folks prefer to watch this on YouTube, and they say it's easier to do it there, it's easier to find, and I get it. It's also easier to watch and faster than live. So I watch a lot of YouTube videos myself. I think we've all gone to YouTube University these days to be able to figure out how to do something that may have done figured out in a while. So when you watch a lot of YouTube videos, you can kind of speed it up faster than real time, and folks say that they appreciate that flexibility with a YouTube feed. So the one downside is that this live interaction that we have here on social media, we're trying to figure out how to do that a little bit better via YouTube. So we'll see how that goes. So it's good to see folks checking in already, just looking over here at Instagram, pulling back through the feed. And Bushliner, that's a great comment. We should talk. It would be great to get a Bushliner for the raffle plane at some point. You guys are building an incredible product. You got a lot of time in 180s and 185s, and what I'm seeing you guys doing is pretty incredible. So, maybe someday, right? All right, so looking over here at Facebook, it's got some folks logged in, but not seeing any specific comments just yet. So we're going to go ahead and jump right in and get to this. I try to keep it to no longer than 20 minutes because it seems that is about everybody's attention span for these things, even when it comes to really big issues like what we have for you this time around. Before I get to these issues, first let me just say thank you to all of you for your help and your participation in the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering. First part of this month, it was a tremendous success, and we did it was great. It's great to see everybody, and good to see the interactions between the vendors. And it was a good event. So mentioned earlier, having some difficulties reconnecting right now as we speak. So it just proved my point. Facebook is a little problematic. All right, so it was great to see folks there at the Great Alaska Aviation Gathering. Valdez was the following weekend, and then this past weekend was Fairbanks Aviation Day. There were some events happening down on the Kenai Peninsula. Summer is full on, that's for sure. All right, so what do we have for you as far as updates for this month? You probably have already heard the news, but the FAA Reauthorization Act of 2024 was signed by President Biden last week. It passed both the House and the Senate and went through their conference committees and then was put on the president's desk, and he signed that bill last week. Now, there's a lot of things in this bill. It's over 1,000 pages, and I got to tell you, I'm wading through all of it and trying to make sure I'm not missing anything for us here in Alaska. There's a lot of really good stuff in this bill that this act, actually, this is not a bill, this act, which reauthorizes the FAA to operate for another 5 years. There's a lot of things that were written into this that we have been asking for and that we have been needing here in Alaska for a very long time. So I'm going to go through just some of the very high spots. We're going to talk more about these off and on in the days ahead, what they mean for us here in Alaska, how it's going to be implemented, what are we going to do to make sure that these things actually come to fruition like we think that they will based on what's signed here in the Act. So I know a lot of people, again, I'm just hitting the highlights here. I've got some notes that I'm going to be referring to. The expansion of basic med. There were some pretty big things put in here about basic med. Primarily increases the eligibility for people to use basic med in aircraft up to 12,500 pounds. Now, it used to be at 6,000 pounds. Now it's up to 12,500. I shouldn't say now. Within 180 days from last week, it will be up to 12,500 pounds. Another increase in the capabilities of basic med is to go from 5 passengers up to 6 passengers. So that will be included with this revision of basic med. The number of seats in an aircraft have increased from 6 up to 7. And once again, these changes become applicable 180 days after President Biden signed this act last week. 100 low lead is a big thing. We talked a lot about that at the gathering. I've been dealing with a lot of meetings about this right now. It is the hot topic. Senator Sullivan has done a lot of good for us here in Alaska when it comes to this transition to an unleaded fuel. And we've got some things written into the Reauthorization Act specifically for Alaska when it comes to a transition. Now, one of the biggest things in here is that the FAA is now tasked with making sure that 100 low lead remains available until 2030 or until such point that there is a commercially viable alternative. Now, there's some discussions as to what does that mean? What does commercially viable mean? The GAMI fuel that's out there, there's about 1 million gallons of that have been produced. There are some, especially in California, that are saying, oh, that's commercially available. Not so fast. It's a little more involved than that. Just because it's been manufactured and blended does not necessarily mean it is technically commercially available. But what we have carved out for Alaska, and we're going to talk a little bit more detail about this carve out. Alaska has an additional 2 years that the FAA must make 100 low lead available, or an additional 6 months if there is a viable alternative before that 2030 date. So it gives us another 2 years to work through this process, or another 6 months if there's something out there that comes available sooner. Now, on the surface, first let's just say that Senator Sullivan was trying to get 4 years. It was negotiated down to 2. He was not happy about that. Thank you, Senator Sullivan, for fighting for us so hard. You may have seen some video of a committee hearing where that was debated. Senator Sullivan really met committee for what was going on there. And so 2 years instead of 4 years. Here's the problem, though. Talking with Crowley, which if you haven't seen that deep dive that I did with Crowley and then with Eagle Fuel Cell, which is different than the Eagle Initiative, but Kurt Hartwig with Eagle Fuel Cell, which that was a great conversation with him. And so what we found out in that conversation with Ross St. John with Crowley, again, is on our YouTube channel. Go back and watch that if you haven't. Crowley is the importer of 100 low lead into the state of Alaska. They are willing to import whatever fuel we as an industry want to burn. However, the problem is they can't instantly switch. They're thinking right now, and again, we're early in this process, but the way it looks right now, the way it appears today, Crowley's going to need between 4 and 6 years to make a transition once they know what the fuel is and once they know more about that fuel. That's a long time. And so that's one of the main reasons why Senator Sullivan was trying to get us a little more time than the rest of the United States to be able to make this transition. Here's the problem. Alaska consumes quite a bit of 100 low lead. On a national scale, though, we don't consume enough that if there is a commercially viable fuel in the lower 48 or we get to the 2030 deadline, and now there's some things that are happening, which, by the way, I shouldn't use the word deadline. It's not really a deadline. There is no mandate from the EPA that says we must transition by a certain date. What all this is ensuring that 100 low lead will remain available until at least 2030. But if there's a transition that happens before that, Alaska is not a big enough market to justify the expense of continuing the refineries and the blending processes just for this market. Fuel's going to get more expensive. It's going to be harder to get. Because we may have a little bit of extra time doesn't necessarily mean that it will be available on the market. So here's where economics and capitalism and all these things play into how we actually do this. And it's not just going to be about regulations and the things that are handed down by politicians and bureaucrats. So I'm watching this very closely. This is a major issue for us, not just the membership of the Alaska Airmen's Association, but all of us here in Alaska. And so we're watching this issue incredibly close. So I can go into more details about that, but we need to keep the pace going here to cover all the other things that are in the FAA Reauthorization Act. Some great things that are happening with increased funds that are being available. It authorizes $4 billion a year for FAA airport projects. That's up from 3.4, just rounding, 3.4 billion. Now, the really cool thing is it earmarks part of that money, $1 billion of that $4 billion goes to General Aviation airports. And that's an increase from $670 million. And so that's good news. That's more funding available for General Aviation airports, which, by the way, that's what we have here in Alaska. And so that's going to help us out a lot. There's some teeth that have been added to some of the penalties that the FAA has the ability to charge airports when it comes to diverting funds. Some penalties there to kind of make that even worse if they do that. So looking here, some other things about airports. Here we go. I want to make sure that I come back to some of these because there's some really good things to talk about. It increases the share of federal funds that go to a project. When an FAA grant is issued to a sponsored airport, that airport sponsor is responsible for a percentage of a match. So let's just do some dumb pilot math here. If there was a $1 million grant, right now there's about a $70,000 match that's required, so it's about that 7% point. But what's going to happen here, so it goes from 93% to a 95% match for some of the locally sponsored airports to come up with some cash to be able to accept that grant and put that project into play. Some of the other things that are happening with funding, let me make sure I'm not missing anything before we go to some other things. Some of the other funding issues helps with basically guaranteeing that you're going to receive those funds, and that's the reason why that's important is because a lot of smaller airports have to go and get a loan for that match and then get a bond or something like that, and you don't really have that grant money already in your pocket. So a little bit of a technicality. Something of big importance for us here in Alaska, if you've been following the Trent Palmer case, where it talks about close proximity, unsafe altitudes, all those things are wrapped up in that Trent Palmer case. The Alaska Airmen's Association filed an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief in his appeal, basically saying that we're concerned the dangerous precedent that would set by if you come in and you do a low approach and do an inspection pass on an off-airport site, but then wind up not choosing to land there, then the FAA would have the precedent to come in and do an investigation and possibly violate you for being too close to persons or property. There's some language here in Section 809 that talks about that specific issue, and it prohibits the FAA from applying a specific regulation in any manner that requires a pilot to continue a landing that is unsafe. So you would think that we wouldn't need to do that, but it's in there just to make sure. Let's see, some other things. Requires the FAA to develop a low-cost voluntary ADS-B solution. And so that's going to be interesting to watch. Something of importance for us here in Alaska, you may remember there were a bunch of folks that had to go back and retest because of a problem with an examiner on a check ride. And so there's some language in here to help clarify and clear up that process and make that not quite as painful as it has been in the past. Some provisions in here about aircraft privacy. I know that's a big concern for folks when it comes to equipping with ADS-B because concerned of privacy issues, and there's some language in this FAA Reauthorization Act that helps answer some of those and makes it easier for us to basically keep our aircraft a little more incognito. That's probably the best word to say for some of those things. One of the other things that came out of ADS-B is a prohibition on using ADS-B data to initiate an investigation. Now that has been kind of policy, but it hasn't been actually written out quite so strongly, so that was included in here. Timely resolution of investigations, bringing it down to basically saying, hey, FAA, if you can't get this done within 2 years, you need to do better. Let's see. Flight instructor certificates. You probably heard the rumors that flight instructor certificates may be changing a little bit to where they will not have an expiration date moving forward. So we'll keep a close eye on how that plays out in the end. Some Alaska-specific things when it comes to this act. It basically codifies and makes the FASI, the FAA Alaska Safety Initiative, which, by the way, they're changing it to the Don Young Safety, I can't remember exactly what that acronym stands for, but anyway. So there's language in this Reauthorization Act that deals specifically with these Alaska programs, which helps us get away from the business case model of trying to compete with other places in the lower 48 and the number of enplanements, the number of people that actually use air traffic to travel around, where we traditionally have lost that business case model to other airports in other parts of the United States simply because we don't have the population center that other states do. So it helps alleviate some of that. It also prohibits the FAA from downgrading an airport, even though the critical design aircraft, the design of the airport based on the highest use of airplane, it prohibits the FAA from downgrading an airport from what it currently is and mandates that they must help maintain the current airport. So it helps us not lose runway length or width, which has been a concern for us here in Alaska. Also helps us with the FAA coming up with a dashboard, a way to keep better track of the infrastructure that we have and know exactly what's wrong with it if it's not working. It also expands the scope to where even though it may not be an FAA issue that causes, say, the weather information from a particular village not getting out into the system where we can know what it is in our pre-flight to be able to plan. The system itself may work, but because the telephone contractor has got a problem in that village, well, that's not technically an FAA problem, although it's part of their system. It's not their infrastructure. And so up till now, the FAA says, look, there's nothing we can do. That's not our stuff. It's not broken. The things that we maintain and own and operate, all that's working. That's the phone company's problem. Well, we're going to change the way we keep track of those things now and be able to keep a better idea of the health of our infrastructure. So that's what's going on with that. So there's a lot more in this FAA Reauthorization Act. a lot of really good things that help us here in Alaska. This has been a very large part of my life for several months, actually over a year now, helping our congressional delegation in D.C. know and understand what our needs are. And again, I want to thank Representative Peltola, Senator Murkowski, and Senator Sullivan, and especially their staff for listening, for digging deep and understanding what these issues are and how it affects us here in Alaska. There's a lot of good stuff in this Reauthorization Act that will help us. Some just quick updates on some other things. ADS-B ground stations. You will start to see an increase in coverage of ADS-B data here in the state of Alaska. Kodiak, Homer, Middleton Island, Johnstone Point will all have new ground-based transceivers coming online sometime this summer. The last I heard was about a week and a half ago. The FAA is continuing to do testing on these sites. They are very close to going live with these, and we will see those happen this summer. Tok, Fort Yukon, and Gulkana, those will come online most likely early fall, and we'll see increased ADS-B coverage in those areas. Next summer, we will see Bettles and Galena come online with ADS-B ground stations. So what this means is that you will be able to receive that flight information service, that FISB, flight information service broadcast, which is all the weather data, the radar, all those things, the NOTAMs that all come in via ADS-B in. These areas will now have radio coverage to be able to pick that data up. So that's good stuff. Good to see that the FAA has listened and is working very hard to get some more ground stations for us here in Alaska. So we're going to go ahead and wrap things up, but really quick, I want to remind you that we are going to make a switch in the platform that we're doing this with. If you've been watching on Facebook, it has continually reloaded and paused because Facebook is just problematic. Instagram seems to be doing better with being able to keep that live stream going and healthy. But what we're going to wind up doing is we're going to go strictly to YouTube as our platform for doing this. That will make things a little bit easier for production-wise, help alleviate some of the technical issues that we've been having, and is a better platform for this kind of interaction. So be looking for that change to happen most likely next month, and we'll be moving on from there. Just a quick announcement that you may have already seen on some of our social media outlets already, but next year's raffle plane has been announced. It is a Legend Cub, MOAC, mother of all Cubs, is in the process right now. It's almost complete, actually, being built, and that airplane will be at Oshkosh this summer. So look for that airplane if you're going to attend Oshkosh. Let's see, I do have a question on Facebook. I want to answer that one right quick. Yes, there is a map of current ADS-B coverage. If you do a search, ADS-B coverage Google Earth, there is a page where the FAA does have what that current coverage is. That is not showing us what the additional coverage will be, but you can look and see what those areas are at those places, and you can kind of get an idea of what we're looking like for the potential for new coverage. And of course, it all depends on altitude as a major factor because these sites are line of sight. So back to the raffle plane for next year. It will be at Oshkosh, so look for some more social media updates on that. It's going to be another great airplane. So again, thanks for everybody's patience. We went a little longer than 20 minutes this month, but a lot of information about the FAA Reauthorization Act. And I encourage you to reach out to me if you've got questions. You can do that through social media. You can do that through our website. My phone number and email address are available on alaskaairmen.org. And I'd be glad to help you work through whatever questions you may have. All right, so with that, I'm going to say goodnight and wrap things up here at the hangar and head home and have some supper with my wife. So with that, till next time, we'll see you.